My name's Harold. Today we're going to continue on with the next part, I guess part 3 of the model engine flywheel mold. But before we get into that, I wanted to tell you about when I was working in an evil polluting chemical plant. We had a particular job that I was on, a refrigeration job, and part of that was drying the instrument air. Now, the instrument air is pretty critical to a plant, and this air went through two big vessels that were, I guess 3 foot in diameter and maybe 9 foot, 10 foot tall. They were full of desiccant, and the air would come through one of them until the desiccant got pretty well saturated with water, and then we'd go out and we'd switch over to the other one that had desiccant in it, and we'd put heat on the one that it was wet and drive all the water out of it. And you do that back and forth. You had to switch them every day, and that way you kept clean instrument air. And the reason the instrument air is so important is in a evil polluting plant or refinery, whatever it is, you've got hundreds of control valves, and they run on air, which they call instrument air. And this is, let me get that to focus. Looks a little fuzzy, doesn't it? This is the part of the valve where the liquid flows through down here, and there's a little plug right there that moves up and down to regulate the flow. And what it's moving up and down on is this stem right here, and the stem goes through the spring and up here into a rubber diaphragm. It's got a metal piece in the middle to bolt that stem to. And what goes in this part is air, 3 to 15 pounds of air, and the air pushes down, pushes that stem down, and opens that valve to let the liquid flow through, or air, or gas, or whatever it is that's being controlled. But if you let water get in here, well, water will jam the thing up and it won't move at all. It'll be stuck open or stuck closed or stuck halfway. So it's important to dry the air out. Well, there was, of course, 4 of us that worked that job. You got a shift that's working days, you got a shift that's working evenings, you got a shift that's working graveyards, and you've got a shift that's off. I preferred the shift that was off, but I only got to do it, every so often. Anyway, it was a rotating shift. You'd go from working days to, say, graveyards to, and then go working evenings. But, you'd have a little time off in between. At the end of graveyards, we got to go on what's called a long change. We'd go off on Friday morning and come back to work Wednesday night. That's when we'd always go out of town, visit relatives and stuff. But anyway, back to the air dryer. One of my duties was to go out every day and switch these dryers, and of course there was a lot of precautions. Don't you dare mess up. Don't open the right thing and the wrong thing, and do not let the air stop, because everything would shut down there that was dependent on it. And so we had a little bit of problem with it there. And this one guy, he was a guy that was full of baloney a lot of the times. He could tell some tall tales and stuff. And we had shift change, and he was telling us that we were doing things wrong. That's why we'd been having problems with the air there for a couple of days. And I think really the desiccant was just, worn out and needed changing out. You have to do that from time to time. But anyway, he said, what you've got to do is to set the timer. He said, none of you guys are ever setting the timer. He said, I come in, I find nobody set the timer. And really, there was a timer between the two vessels, but it had been out of service since before I got on that job. No telling how long before, years before, no doubt. And so we said, well, you show us just what the heck you're talking about. So we all went, parading down to the compressor building where the thing was at, and it was a refrigeration compressors. That was the job. We were making cold water for the rest of the process, and besides the fact that we were making dry air. And anyway, so we go down there, and he shows us the timer and how you got to set it and all this stuff. He says, this is why you're having trouble with the air. And some smart aleck, I don't know, might have looked like me or close or something, says, but look here, there's no wires coming in and out of this timer box. He said, what? I said, there's no wires coming in and out of this timer box. I don't know how it can control anything when it doesn't have any wires. And he got that stunned look on his face. He went around and he looked at that and he looked at it like he was trying to wish something into existence there. And what had happened, he had been for years, he'd been setting that timer, and it had been out of service, no telling how long. So he, we wound up calling him the refrigeration engineer. He, of course, there's a lot of even better stories about him. If I think about it, sometimes I'll tell about how he called Desmond, got him upset. But anyway, I guess it's time to go back to the flywheel mode and make a little more progress. We're going to use the 4-jaw chuck on here. So, back everything up. Pop this little guy off. There's a different wrench for each chuck. Whoa. There we go. We'll get the other one. I can just imagine changing out an A-bomb size chuck, having to have a chain hoist and all that to pick it up. This guy here is nowhere near that category, but it's still heavy enough. Get this thing on there. There we go. That got it. Now I need to turn the jaws around the other direction. Oh, yeah, I'll have to determine where the center of this stuff is going to be and drill a hole through the two of them right dead center. And I didn't do that yet. I almost forgot that. So I'm going to go back over to the mill and we'll drill a hole. Who would have thought that a fellow as wonderful and intelligent as me would have forgot to drill the middle hole. I've got some number 2 tapered pins on order from eBay. Got a pile of them for $10. It would have been better if they'd been assorted pins, but that wasn't what the guy was selling. He was selling tapered pins, number 2 tapered pins, and apparently they were surplus out of something. Now that looks like about the middle of that spot, and that's going to give me a, need to double check with my scale if I can find it. Here we go. Alright, that gives me alright, I took them and kind of cleaned it up on the belt sander over there, just so that I wouldn't offend the sensibilities of any machinist, real machinist, that might happen to accidentally click on this video. We won't, you know, we don't want to do that. It could put them back to, you know, to amateur status or something if they had that big a shock, maybe. And I've got the jaws turned around here, and I'm trying to figure out which way is that I was looking at them before. I think that's about where it was. Move that over a little. I'm going to use this, the point of this live center to get me dead on there. All right, I've got a little crack at each jaw there. I think if I could bring them down just close. Mr. Pete, he did his cutting on the mill. He's got a rotary table, so he just lined that up and cut everything just right. I don't have one, so I'm gonna have to depend on that hole in the middle to make both halves turn out about the same. Besides, with the flywheel, you can't see but one side of it at a time, so if I cast it and then I machine off any little imperfections, you won't be able to tell the difference anyway. Besides which, you can't see but one side of a flywheel at a time. Alright, so we're going to move this tailstock back. That means the camera's got to move. Way back there. And that'll retain a view of what's going on here. Okay, there you go. I found my calipers. I knew I had some. In fact, I think I've got 2 sets. I just didn't know where I had the little boogers at. So I guess I'll just cut a little circle around it and call that done. And I think it'll be easier to do like this, considering which way it'll be spinning. Okay, that made a little circle. Can't see it real well. I added 3 more lights out here. I guess I didn't put them in the right spot. It's really nice over the mill. You can see everything. It's just up here that you can't. Alright, now I got to drag out the tools for this. Alright, I've got a 1/2 inch end mill, which should make a relatively good square hole there for a hub for the wheel. I'm going to run it right up there to where it touches. I'm going to set this thing on 1 inch, and then I'll drill it down to 1/4 inch worth. That ought to be good enough. That'll give me a 1/2 inch on either side of the flywheel for the thing to stick out. I could make it bigger, but if it's too big, then I just have to cut some extra off after I cast the wheel. Alright, we'll just cut a little ring for the outer edge here to get started. And then we'll measure down and cut one for the inner edge so that I can work between them. Now we want to move in, we want 1/4 inch, and I think that his stuff may be about that dimension, that this flywheel is probably 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch thick. I'll just set my calipers for that, and these little guys. I'll be right back. I'm not at all certain how thick the flywheel edge is on Mr. Pete's stuff there. It must be more in the 1/4 inch size, because that's it's not going to leave much room for spokes. If I make it 3/8, let me stop and reconsider. I guess 1/4 of an inch, that'd probably be about right, so we'll just mark it. That's a visible mark. Okay. I don't know. We'll see how everything comes out. We'll move in there and make that little spot kind of permanent. I think that'll do that. Alright, now we've got to go through all this stuff all over again for the next one. That's looking about right. Maybe I need to clean that up just a tiny bit before I go moving anything. Alright, so we did that at 30 degrees. We cut a little bevel on it. Looks like it needs the tiniest little bit of deburring there. Alright, now that, other than cutting the spokes, it's got one of them cut on the lathe. That's all I'm going to cut on the lathe. And we will just make one last double check on the depth. Yeah, it's about 5 thousandths over a quarter inch. So that'll do. I guess at some point I'll start working a little bit more precise, but not right now, huh? Alright, loosen that up. And that. And we'll get the other one, live center, and we'll mount it up in there. And we'll do all the same things over again. So I don't guess there's any point in doing the same thing over again on camera, because it'll be exactly what I did just right there.